Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. On behalf of Goodwin University's Office of Student Affairs and Goodwin University's Occupational Therapy Assisting Program, I'd like to offer you a warm welcome to our second annual Achieving Success and Navigating Career Obstacles with a Disability program. My name is Stephanie Hertz. I am the Assistant Director of Career Services here at Goodwin. This is my colleague Marty Levine, Fellow Career Specialist at Goodwin. And we are going to serve as like your flight attendants or your guides for the day. So some of you may know that we kicked off 2020 with an exciting announcement. As of January 6th, Goodwin College officially became Goodwin University. Yay! This change is very exciting for a number of reasons. In particular, it advances our mission to make a quality, career-focused education more accessible to a greater number of individuals. It also offers new opportunities for focused research that supports access to education, workforce development, and advocacy for important community issues. And one of those issues and opportunities comes in the form of this program today. We hope that through today we are able to look at the intersection of career development and disability services and resources, and how we can ultimately better support our students and our peers in the community who have disabilities, ultimately to empower our Connecticut workforce to be as diverse and as strong as possible. So we're hoping that today we accomplish a few goals, one of which is to gain knowledge and awareness of challenges and successes faced by individuals with a disability when navigating employment. We hope that there's an opportunity for you to network among yourselves with colleagues and peers, both in human resources and disability support services arenas. And of course, we hope that you'll walk away today and gain resources for achieving success with a disability. So I just want to offer a few quick thank yous. I want to offer a big thank you again to the Office of Student Affairs with a specific nod to accessibility services led by Cindy Clark. You can wave your hand. Also to Veterans Affairs led by Craig Jordan. And as I mentioned, to Career Services led by Director Pat Shaw. And all of this is under the leadership of Dr. Tyrone Black, who is our Vice President for Student Affairs and Dean of Students, who will be joining us this morning as well. In addition, as I mentioned, I want to thank the Occupational Therapy Assisting Program, which is led by Program Director Parth Desai. Today, the OTA program is represented by former Program Director and Instructor Deanne Anderson, who actually will be moderating a large part of today's program, and Kathy Kravanek, I think Kathy's back here, who's our fieldwork coordinator. Thank you all. Thank you, with a specific thank you to Deanne Anderson and her organization, Creative Development, from Avon, Connecticut, for sponsoring our breakfast this morning. Please extend a thank you to your whole team at Creative Development. It was delicious. Of course, help yourselves throughout the morning. Just a couple quick housekeeping items. So I hope you noticed the bathrooms are right outside here to your right and left. There are different exits. There's a more accessible exit and entrance right behind you in the back where it says the exit sign. And there's a resource table I hope you all noticed when you walked in. You're welcome to take any of the resources. We have great guides on disability resources, or if you brought your own representing your organization, feel free to leave those there. And Hopefully you also have a chance to look through your packets. You can follow along with the PowerPoint today. We have information about our panelists that's also at the resource table. And you'll see there are index cards at your table. If at any point in the morning you want to ask a question but prefer to keep the question anonymous, just fill out one of those index cards, raise your hand. We have a few volunteers who are going to be walking around. We can collect those questions so that we make sure to ask the moderator. Okay, I'm going to pass the baton over to my co-flight attendant here, Mr. Marty Levine, to kick off the agenda. Thanks all.
Okay, we have several different, I don't need that.
Yeah, it's for the video.
Oh, the video?
Yeah, you got it.
Okay. We have several different modes of learning for everybody here, for learning, discussion, asking questions, and one of those modes is, of course, our keynote address. We're right on time. We're on time now. We'll make sure we stay on time. We'll have a panel discussion, and you have these information sheets in your folders. We'll make sure we take a 10 or 15-minute break. Then we're going to have a discussion with our students from Project Search and their director. Then we're going to go into case studies, and this will give you an opportunity to really take what you may be getting from our panelists, as well as what you also bring, and review these somewhat in-depth case studies and have discussions with your colleagues at your tables. That's the Real Stories discussion. And then as we move towards the end, there's always opportunities for Q&A, and we'll talk about the morning. And then we'll finish up before or by 12 noon, and we'll ask you to complete a survey electronically, QR or hard copy that we could give to you as well. Let's see. Okay. At this point, I'd like to introduce Todd Andrews, who knows our keynote speaker, John Slifka. Todd is our Senior Vice President for Economic and Strategic Development here at Goodwin University. Todd? Thank you, Mary. Stephanie, does Todd need this? No. Okay.
Good morning. Welcome to Goodwin University.
Sorry.
Do you have to hook me up?
Yes, please.
Okay. Stand by for technical difficulties. No problem. I have the distinct pleasure and honor to introduce this morning's keynote speaker, Jonathan Slifka. Presently serving as the executive assistant to the Commissioner of the Department of Aging and Disability Services for the state of Connecticut, John has had a very successful career rooted in advocacy for those with disabilities. He previously served for 4 years as Governor Malloy's liaison to the disability community, during which time he was instrumental in policymaking and government affairs at the cabinet level. Major accomplishments throughout his tenure include developing and passing multiple pieces of legislation, including a bill that changed the international symbol of access in Connecticut to one that more accurately represents the dynamic capabilities of disabled individuals. He also reformed and restructured the Governor's Committee on Employment and Persons with Disabilities, and he developed and created events and programs for the annual National Disability Employment Awareness Month. Before moving on to work for the governor, John actually worked here at Goodwin College. At the time, it was Goodwin College. He was part of our admissions team, and with his good friend Eric Emmett, who is joining us today, he was also involved in the development of Goodwin College's club sports program, and I think ran one of our first Goodwin blogs and podcasts, I believe. John uses his personal understanding of the challenges faced by the disability community to strengthen and inform his commitment to the work with which he is tasked on a daily basis. He is a founding member of the board of directors for the Miracle League of Connecticut, whose mission is every child deserves a chance to play. The Miracle League provides opportunities for children with physical and cognitive challenges to participate in baseball leagues at the Miracle League Field in West Hartford, which is fully wheelchair accessible and was the first of its kind in New England. And I believe I saw on social media last night that there's another Miracle League field that's going to be built in East Lyme.
Yes.
East Lyme. So that program continues to expand. But as mentioned, personally, I have known John and his wonderful family for well over 30 years. Joining him today is his wife, Andrea, his beautiful daughter, Lauren, and his mom and dad, Janice, and Bob Slifka. So I'd like to give a shout out and wave to those in the back of the room. I first met John when he was just a youngster. John always had to advocate for himself, particularly when it came to the lack of opportunities as someone with a physical disability. When his older brother, Scott, was off enjoying summer youth basketball camps, John had limited opportunities. There were no basketball or recreational camps for those who were limited by physical disability and perhaps bound to a wheelchair. But he and his mom, Janice, went off and created something special. With the help of Hall of Fame tennis player Ivan Lendl, almost 30 years ago, the Adaptive Sports Camp was created, the very first wheelchair camp of its kind in the Northeast. Today, the camp is run by the Hospital for Special Care on the campus of the University of St. Joseph. The week-long free summer camp allows dozens of children aged 6 to 19 to enjoy all kinds of sports, including tennis, swimming, basketball, track and field, and many other sports. Many of the counselors are wheelchair athletes themselves and serve as mentors and coaches to the campers. Hundreds of individuals have enjoyed this camp over the last 30 years. So I congratulate certainly Janice and all those who are involved with John in having this program continue to run. And I believe this year, next, it's going to be their 30th anniversary. So congratulations on that. John has been involved from the beginning and is still very active today, although today his job responsibilities in raising his own family may get in the way of being a camp counselor, which he did for many decades, but he still serves as a role model and mentor to the campus and his campers, and is still very active in visiting the camp every year. But it all started with the inspiration of one individual who found a way to navigate some obstacles with a disability in order to achieve success. One individual who has taken his success and shared it with others. One individual who continues to advocate on behalf of those faced with similar challenges in order for them to be successful. John, welcome back to campus. I have the honor and pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker for the day, Jonathan Slifka.
Thank you. Please stand by. Sure. No, that's fine. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Andrews for that incredible introduction. It's so nice that all the information that he shared has the added benefit of all being true. Or I'd owe him a lot more money than I do right now for the introduction that he just gave me. Thank you all very much for being here. Thank you to Goodwin University for inviting me to be a part of this morning. It's a pleasure. So I'd like to start this morning by making you perhaps a little bit uncomfortable, but this is something that the disability community deals with on a daily basis. So in all seriousness, by a show of hands, how many of you have ever heard someone say, or maybe said yourself, and that's okay because we're here to learn, that person is so inspiring when referring to people with a disability? Okay. It's common, and it's generally very well intentioned. Okay, to someone who is able-bodied, they can't imagine having to live daily life with the added challenges of a disability. And so people who are able to do just that and not only live each day but succeed, that's impressive. The fact is, though, people with a disability don't want to be inspiring because they succeed with a disability. They want to be inspiring for the same reasons everyone does. Because they succeed at something that brings them joy each day. Watching someone live with joy, to me, is an ultimate inspiration, and it's something that every person, regardless of ability, should be able to do. So if you're a person with a disability looking for work, or someone who's helping a person with disabilities find work, the focus should always be on the ability and their passion. So in the job search, what are the kinds of things that we look for? And what are the kinds of things that, as people that are going to help people with disabilities look for a job, what kinds of things should you look for? And as the candidate, what should you look for? What abilities does this person have, right? What skills have they gained through other experiences? All of those things. That's the first thing. In what ways do they think they can make a meaningful contribution to whatever job, organization, company that they're going to work for? And what can they bring to a role that is unique? So if I were to ask you, and I'm not going to call anybody out, but if I were to ask you to give me 3 words to describe what you bring to the workforce that no one else does, could you do it?
Yes.
Okay. That's impressive. It's actually not all that easy to articulate what it is that makes you stand out from someone else when looking solely at your unique capabilities and perspective. And I'm not talking about I make better coffee than everyone else on my floor. I'm talking about I'm the most efficient, I'm the most creative or the most forward-thinking person at whatever the job might be, project management, copywriting, or at a college, university, admissions, things of that nature. So we need to own these things about ourselves, and then we need to look for these things in others. And we need to focus on these skills when we're navigating in any job search. But it's particularly important for persons with disabilities. So for just a moment, I'd like to entertain a case study. So here's a candidate looking for a job. 13 years experience as a call center representative, working on customer support systems and platforms and in sales. Previous roles include quality assurance representative for Precision Response Corporation and a personal vacation planner for Carnival Cruise Lines. And they subsequently worked in enrollment and admissions for a college. So if you were going to look for a job for this person, what roles do you think that they might be qualified to take on next? And why would you think that? Not all at once. I know some of you haven't had your coffee yet. Yeah.
Well, anything to do with interacting with people, because all of those positions had good communication or interactive skills.
Okay, so any job that involved interacting with people, because they exhibit communication skills throughout these jobs. Mm-hmm.
Career counselor, maybe?
Okay, there's no wrong answer, by the way, to this. So
An office manager because of the organizational and communication concept related
Okay.
to that.
an office manager. Anything else?
Whatever they felt like they wanted
Yeah.
to do next.
There you go. That's good.
It's nice to have you at the table,
That's
Mr.
the right
Murphy.
answer.
What did you say?
Whatever
he
this
wants
person
to
wanted
do.
to do next.
That's so true.
Okay, so what if I told you that that's not a fictional person? What if I told you that that person's next role, their next job, was the governor's liaison to the disability community for the state of Connecticut? Okay, that's me. And I'm not sharing this with you to toot my own horn or do that. I'm showing this to you because it's the real life example of someone that can go from jobs like these to a job working in government. Now, obviously, having a strong understanding of life as a member of the disability community was helpful in me attaining my first role in government, as was my notoriety and involvement in local politics, and I also was a March of Dimes poster child in my youth. But my particular course is not typical, and I understand that, but I'm grateful that when an opportunity was available, the people who needed to make the decision to employ me focused on the skills and abilities that I attained in my previous roles, above what specifically those previous roles were or where I held them. So let's look at some of the skills, because some of them were mentioned here this morning. Let's look at some of the skills that are cultivated in jobs like those and that prepared me for a role in the governor's office. So the ability to engage individuals and process feedback to improve experience and processes. So again, that involves dealing with people. So very high level, sort of generic, broad looking view at a skill, but also a creative way to look at a skill and ability that was attained. And that's a way you need to approach looking at people with disabilities when they're looking for a job. Be able to identify solutions to problems and present them clearly to stakeholders. Again, that's high level, it's generic, but that's a person with a disability. When I was showing you the last slide, by the way, that showed you what these other jobs were that this person had had, was there any indication whatsoever that that person had a disability?
No.
Exactly. So keep that in mind when you're looking at a person's resume and helping them try to find a job. Okay? Able to lead others towards progress on a common goal. Again, high level, a little bit generic, but it gets you in the mind of a creative thinking process and how you can help somebody navigate obstacles. And able to manage projects and gain expertise in required areas. Okay. So these skills combined with my personal experience allowed me to take on my first government role, in which I took part in identifying needs in the disability community, and not only forming the right groups of people to address those needs, but also actually was part of the policymaking process. So what was one major thing, and I hope this is brought up more often throughout the morning, but there's one major thing that I was afforded that was critical to my success. And I will throw it out to the room to take a guess, and if anyone gets it, I will be shocked. Any guesses?
Support from your wife.
Support from my wife. Thank you. Yes, I definitely had support from my wife every step of the way. Dignity of risk. Does anybody know what that is?
Taking a chance on you.
So I'll read it for you, but it's the idea that self-determination and the right to take reasonable risks are essential for dignity and self-esteem, and so should not be impeded by excessively cautious caregivers concerned about their duty of care. So I attended an event similar to this about 3 or 4 years ago, and there was a headhunter that was a recruiter that was helping people with disabilities find jobs, and they told this story. Okay, they found somebody a job that was completely in their wheelhouse, something that they wanted to be doing, they were excited about it, and about 3 or 4 days into their first week, they got a call from this person's boss, and they said, I don't think this job's going to work out for them. And she said, why? What happened? She said, well, they show up every show up every day late. They're flustered when they get here, and it's affecting their attitude, and it may not be a good fit. And she said, well, this doesn't sound like the candidate that I put in front of you. So let me dig a little deeper. So she got in touch with the candidate, and it turned out that the issue was that the employee had an issue navigating the public transit system. Now, we've never heard of that issue in the state of Connecticut for people with disabilities, and potentially anyone else in the room. So it wasn't the job, it was getting to the job. Okay? So when you think of dignity of risk and you think of helping people with disabilities find a job, think of it in the following ways, and ask yourself these questions. A, have you ever had a dream? B, have you ever attempted that dream? And C, have you ever failed? Every single one of you in this room should be raising your hand at those questions. And if you can't, then you shouldn't be helping people with disabilities find a job, because those are the exact same things that they should be afforded. They should be afforded a dream, they should be afforded a shot at a dream, and they should be allowed to fail. Don't be afraid of that. Okay. So I was given the opportunity to fail. People with disabilities should be given the opportunity to fail just as everyone else is. Now, it can be incredibly helpful in the career search process for a person with disabilities if the people they are working with in that process help vet them and identify positions that are most attainable in which they might be most successful to minimize the risk of failure. That's helpful both for the individual and the employer, but it's critical not to undervalue or underestimate the person in that process. And that's what happened in the story that I shared with you earlier. The person was undervalued. Okay, we want people with disabilities to be realistic about what they can achieve, but also we want them to be able to pursue that joy that will inspire them and others every day. So when it comes to all of these things, dignity, risk, and such, I've always looked at the movable and immovable. So what are movable objects or movable obstacles I was able to get around in my career? Accessibility issues, articulation of my skill set, and the attitude of others. So let's take these one at a time. Accommodations can, and as we all know, should be made to make workplaces functional for a person with disabilities. And accommodations can run the gamut from no to low cost to certainly higher end cost. Okay? I worked hard over the years on my interview skills and how I explained the way I'd be able to apply the skills I learned in one work environment, like Carnival Cruise Lines, to a very different work environment, like the Capitol. And also never underestimate the fact that the attitude of others can be swayed if you persevere. Just like any candidate for a job, we need to believe in ourselves and sell ourselves. Also, I've never been afraid to work the connections that I have, and you shouldn't either when working with this community. That's why social network platforms like LinkedIn are incredibly powerful and incredibly successful. Okay? So now let's move on to the immovable objects, or barriers rather. Physical limitations, cognitive job requirements, attitude of others. For those of you who have had your coffee, yes, I have that on there twice. We're all probably familiar with the things that are immovable for someone with disabilities navigating their career search. Some jobs will require physical or cognitive skills that are simply not a match for the job seeker. And unfortunately, some employers may, despite our best efforts, not be able to see a qualified person's skill set if previous experience doesn't exactly match the relevant work experience required in a job description. That's likely true for any candidate, but as a person with a disability, I can tell you I had a few extra rungs in the ladder to climb as a result of this. But the ultimate goal at the end here, be passion focused. This is the bottom line. My career track is circuitous, to be certain. In the last few years, I worked as an equal opportunity employment specialist for the state, and today I serve as an executive assistant to the Commissioner of the Department of Aging and Disability Services. I chair the Governor's Committee on Employment for Persons with Disabilities and focus on the issue of helping qualified people find gainful employment every day. Now, I can't say that throughout my career I was happy where I was every step of the way, but who can? Ever since I've been in government, there were times I wasn't certain where I was working was the right fit. I can absolutely say that I learned something with each new experience along my career path, and I took to heart the criticisms that I received that were valid and dismissed the ones that weren't. I worked hard not to allow my disability to get in the way of what I wanted, and I put effort into developing my own personal narrative. I let my disability inform the work that I do as much as necessary, but it has never defined me. We should all consider ourselves to be defined by our intellect, our insightfulness, and what we contribute to the workplace and the world. All any of us can do is our best and determine how, when called upon, we'll tell our own story. The world has changed, but not as much as you might think. When I was going to school, I was one of the first children with a disability mainstreamed through the public school system in my hometown, and the ADA did not exist. My first few years, I went to a school that was not handicapped accessible at all, and I had to be carried around by older students from one place to another. During my time there, I didn't have a wheelchair yet, so during recess, The only way the school would allow me to participate was by bringing my desk chair outside and have me sit in it watching the other kids play. I vividly remember getting out of the chair once to sit on the ground and play with Matchbox cars with a classmate, and I got in trouble for it. That was a very isolating experience. I didn't attend a school with an elevator until I was in 5th grade. In high school, I transferred from a one-building public school to an open campus private school after my sophomore year. As luck would have it, it seemed like during my first 2 years of high school, in the one-building school, we hardly got any snow during the winter. When I switched to the open campus, that winter we were hit by a blizzard. Fast forward to my first day working at the Capitol in 2014. The elevator to my office was broken. Here I am, the liaison to the disability community, and I can't get to my desk. All I could think was, thank God I'm here. But truly, as a working person in this society that continues to take baby steps each day to being more accessible, more understanding, and more inclusive of those with disabilities, the best knowledge I can impart on you is that a focus must be put on people's passions. If we can match up people who have something to give with those who are ready to receive it, we will make a difference every day. You will make a difference every day. There will be rejection. There will be times when we need to acknowledge our limitations. There will also be times when we are able to translate skills into a role we may not have imagined would be a good fit, both as the employer and the employee, and something incredible will result. There will be great joy in that, and that is the ultimate goal. I encourage everyone to look for those opportunities. It's been a pleasure this morning. Thanks very much, everyone.
Any questions?
Sure, of course.
Any questions for John at this point?
Mm-hmm.
I want to ask you a question about accommodations.
Sure.
So, if I heard you correctly,
Mm-hmm.
Any employer should be able to give accommodations if necessary, right?
Should be required to, yes.
Should be required to.
Correct.
That's what the law
So, during the interview, does the prospective employee tell them that they require accommodations?
says. That's actually.
oh, I'm sorry, yes,
No, I think
no,
you
please.
should answer that related, but we also will be talking about it later on as well. But definitely.
You can either do that in the interview process, or if you get further along and it looks like you will actually be hired, then you can bring it up then as well. Some of my colleagues may disagree, but you can do it at any point. You can certainly make them aware of it during the interview process. What I can tell you from personal experience is that sometimes you might be afraid to, because that might rule you out as a candidate. Some companies will be afraid of that because immediately when they think of accommodations, they're going to think dollar signs. So if you bring it up sort of after you've been hired, they're kind of on the hook at that point. So you can do it at any point during the process, whenever the candidate is comfortable.
So if you wait until you get hired,
Mm-hmm.
it would be okay then to tell them that you need accommodations, and
Sure.
whether or not they give them to you is another story.
Well, that's true, but and that's where this will be a bigger discussion potentially later. But absolutely, you can do it once you get hired. It's the same for somebody that might be able-bodied, but then it may be the same for somebody that's able-bodied, but then something happens to them. They're employed, right? But now they need an accommodation.
Right.
But they've been working at a company for 10, 15, 20 years, but suddenly they need an accommodation to continue to work there. So yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for coming today. And I wondered, as someone who works in the governor's office on these issues, if you could specifically address invisible disabilities and the specific issues that go with that, and those people needing to simultaneously advocate for themselves and being a potential advocate for people with visible disabilities, and being in that weird dual role. And what is the governor's
So I haven't worked in the governor's office in a year. Right. So, but I want to address what you're saying. So I haven't worked in the governor's office in a year and a half. While I was there, what we did do for all disabilities, one of the comprehensive bills that we did pass was changing the language across all of our state statutes to be person first. And that was for any disability that was referenced within state statutes, which I'm quite certain mentioned a myriad of invisible disabilities. As far as people with invisible disabilities advocating for themselves, I think the first thing that they would need to do is not be afraid to self-identify. That's a challenge in the disability community in general, is that they are afraid to self-identify when it comes to any sort of data gathering that's being done, any job that they're going for. If they can avoid it, they might not self-identify. But it's hard for you to advocate for yourself in any situation like that unless she's done hearing me talk this morning. She gets this at home all. It's hard to advocate for yourself and by extension have others advocate for you unless they know the disability exists. So I think that's the biggest piece of advice I could give to those with invisible disabilities is let people know that you have it because it's invisible. So that way they can help you. You're welcome.
One last question. Anybody? John, thank you very, very much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Stand by.
I'll let you do this. I don't want to break anything.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay. As we continue with our thread of thinking and reflection, as we continue, I don't know if but as we continue with our thread of thinking and reflection, I'd like to introduce Deanne Anderson, our occupational therapist and one of the principals in creative development and instructor here at Goodwin University, to introduce and to facilitate our wonderful panel. Deanne?
Thank you. Can I do that? Oh, or am I going? Yeah, I'm going to do that. Thank you. This is actually our second time hosting a conference on disabilities and navigating the process. So we're really excited, and we have some great panelists. What I'd like to do is just start by having each of you introduce yourselves and just give a little bit of a brief description as to how your role or how you can have assisted people achieving success with navigating disabilities. And then we'll go to the questions.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, people in the back. Hi, Slifkas. Nice to see you. My name is Jill Armet, and I am the Disability Resource Coordinator for the North Central region. I work for Capital Workforce Partners. We are the Workforce Development Board in North Central, and we oversee many of the programs and services in the American Job Centers. So my role is to make sure that the American Job Centers, which is the public workforce system, are accessible to help anybody coming in through our system, whether they have a disability, returning citizen, veteran. All persons are able to use the American Job Centers. So I make sure we're accessible, we're ADA compliant. I make sure that the staff is all trained and provide technical assistance when we are serving a job seeker that has a disability, and that's one of many other a small portion of many of other jobs that I do. But I do also, as a resource coordinator, I help job seekers with disabilities navigate the system of services that can help them, because it can be very confusing. How many agencies? What are the agencies? What is your eligibility? How can the agency help me? So I help people navigate the system.
Maintain the trend of standing up. Good morning, everyone. My name is Orly McCollum. I am an HR business partner for Mass Mutual. I'm also an immediate past president and diversity chair for HRACC, which is a local HR association, an affiliate of SHRM that represents Central Connecticut and New Haven County. I'm also a former EEO, which is an Equal Opportunity Officer for CT Transit in my previous role. So I'm here to represent the employer perspective and touch upon some of the questions that were already raised this morning. Thank you.
Good morning, my name is James Murphy. Please call me Murph. I'm a recent graduate here at Goodwin College Goodwin University. And I am currently working on my clinical master's degree in social work. I began this journey because we've mentioned quite a bit about self-advocating. Because of my disabilities, I've returned to school. I used to be a telephone technician. So now I'm looking to help other veterans self-advocate for themselves because it has been a difficult journey navigating the system. So I want to be able to help other veterans do the same thing.
I guess I'll stand up too. Good morning. I'm Linda Rambler, and thank you for having me here today. I have another announcement about Goodwin. May I make it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Because in addition to becoming Goodwin University, Goodwin is the first university in the state of Connecticut, actually of all higher education institutions, to become a comprehensive transition and post-secondary program, which is designated by the federal government. And it means that people with intellectual disabilities will also be able to apply here and get financial aid like anybody else. And they've been one of the populations that have been kind of systematically left out of higher education. So as you can probably imagine based on that, I'm the person that thinks out of the box and has lots of creative ideas because those are the people that I've worked with. I currently work at the University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities. And as much as a mouthful that was, I'm not going to give you the subtitle and what my job title is, but I have been working with employment from all the way from supporting individuals to policies and developing papers and so on around that kind of stuff. So I think a lot of what Jonathan said, I really want to resonate, which is dignity of risk is what we advocate for everyone, and that means not preconceiving what somebody can do and what they can't do, but also being able to provide the supports for people as they need them. So, and the other component was network, in case I don't get an opportunity to say it later, network.
And I think we have a good idea. I don't know if you have anything else you wanted to say about that. Okay, great. And I think, one of the things just before we start is self-determination is very important, and I think we see it. Obviously, it's important in the job-seeking arena, but also if someone is in the educational system, that self-determination is really the research surrounding that shows that if you can self-determine and identify what your needs are, that's where you're going to have the most success. So we need to think about that not only as we get to the job piece, but how we're preparing people for the workforce as well. Okay, great. So just a reminder that there are papers on your table that if you would like a question answered or if we're talking about something, people will be going around. You can raise your hand and we can grab the question because we do have some pre-written questions, but we want to hear from you and we want you to get the most out of this. Okay. So the first question is for the panel. What have been either personal experiences as an employee, employer, related to challenges or successes in navigating the employment process, and really specifically more so the first 6 months or the interview, onboarding, that type of thing? And anyone can begin the discussion.
I don't want to monopolize, it would be easy for me to do that, but I'm one of those people that has multiple hidden disabilities. And I started to work for the Yukon Health Center. I do name names. I started to work at the Yukon Health Center before my current position. And I was in a situation where some of my disabilities were active. Like I had active fibromyalgia, I was in chronic pain. I have bipolar disorder, which is usually medication managed, But at that point, there were some other things going in my life personally, so I was kind of all over the lot. And I asked for reasonable accommodation, which was that I could work from home on those mornings when I woke up and I knew I was gonna have a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. What UConn, in its infinite wisdom, the health center working with an attorney who is representing the Storrs campus, decided was that I could work at home as long as it was limited to 1 day a month, and that I got advance permission to do that. So I guess one of the things that I say is don't be afraid to walk away. I walked away. I had to resign. There was no, it was a silly attempt at accommodating, and it didn't even remotely meet my needs. So it was clear at that point that it was a bad fit for me. And I think that's part of the dignity of risk, is saying, this isn't for me. I tried it and I failed. I failed because other people made me fail, but I failed at it and it was okay. So I picked myself up, I went on to a different job. Now I'm back and things are good. So I think those are the kinds of things, that was one of my experiences.
I think I could just add to that. I think, especially in the first 6 months, knowing how to apply for a job, people who don't have a lot of experience, maybe their friends, family members, neighbors, they've been in the same job for 20, 30 years, and it's like, oh, you gotta apply online now, and they might not actually know how to apply for a job, and going online, that's all well and good, but are you targeting your resume to meet the applicant tracking systems? Do you know the newest, latest, greatest way that we are doing a resume? I think that, just lost my train of thought. I think that also understanding that 80% of the jobs are actually in the hidden job market. So somebody just spending all day online, they're going to have a hard time getting to that final point. So I think learning how to apply for a job, and that could be help in school, it could be help in your university, career center, it could be working through your agency, whether it be DDS or ADS or the American Job Center. But I think it's really important to be connected to somebody to know how to apply for a job in today's workforce.
And I have a question related to that. Do you find that people know what the resources are and are utilizing them, or are they finding the resources, and how do they?
I think it's a really good question. I'm not sure how to answer it, to be honest with you. However, we at the American Job Center, we're an employment network for the Ticket to Work. So I receive a lot of calls that people have gotten off the Social Security website. And when I mentioned VRS, have you ever heard of vocational rehabilitation? I can't tell you, probably 8 out of 10 have said no. They haven't heard of it. So it is interesting. I would like to reassure you all that the times are changing and have changed, that now we're not operating in our own silos anymore. The vocational rehabilitation agencies, the DDSs, the Department of Developmental Services, Department of Mental Health Addiction Services, vocational rehabilitation, and the American Job Centers, we are all working collaboratively together. And we're learning how to leverage our resources and work as a team to help people move forward in the job search.
Great, thanks.
Just to kind of piggyback off the topic of the job application process and the question that came up earlier about when to ask for an accommodation, and although there could be different perspectives on this, what you'll probably most commonly see on an application is a question which asks, are you able to perform the essential functions of the job with or without a reasonable accommodation, right? So at that point, as long as you are able to perform those essential functions, and every job may not be a fit for someone with a disability, without, et cetera, for various reasons. As long as you answer that question honestly, in my opinion, I do think it's appropriate to address the accommodation specifics. Once you move further along in the application or interview process, or at the time of offer and hire. And at that point, you should have a better idea of what the job entails. And sometimes, from anyone's perspective, we can all say you may not really know what the job is really like until you actually get there. So you may not know if you need an accommodation or what needs to be accommodated. So therefore, I would recommend to, have that conversation later on in the hiring process or at the time of hire.
And I think one of the things you bring up is the essential functions, and does every employer have specifically documented what the essential functions of the job role are, because I think that's an area too where employers need to recognize that's important to have if you are hiring anyone.
Right.
Can they achieve?
Right, and I think some employers have that down to a T. You'll see some job descriptions or job postings which may say 20% of your job will include this, or 50% of your job is that. But then you'll see really generic job descriptions as well. So, it's difficult sometimes to really navigate to know when and what to ask for if you don't have the details of the job. And then to touch on what Linda shared, I think that is your experience with that employer definitely harps on some of the challenges we face, especially in these days and times around workplace flexibility. And if you want to retain good talent, and not being able to demonstrate that flexibility in the workplace is something that employers should be doing better at. So I work at a company that we pride ourselves on flexibility. Even our dress code states that we can wear jeans to work, which for me is a plus, because wearing jeans is flexible, giving workplace flexibility, but also the ability to work from home and really have the ability to have that work-life balance, which is important, especially if you're having a situation where you need to have an accommodation in that respect. So.
Great. Anyone else?
Just to reiterate the point of vocational rehabilitation, that's actually what I am doing right now. School is considered vocational rehabilitation because I can't do the work I used to do. So part of vocational rehabilitation is finding a position that you're going to be able to do and train towards that.
Thank you. I think the next question we'll look at is related to accommodations, because that was brought up. So if you can give some examples of how you may have seen accommodations presented in different workplaces, and what are some of the guidelines and responsibilities of the employer around accommodations, and some of the problems that have been encountered.
So, as I mentioned this morning, when companies think of accommodations, immediately they think dollar signs, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the case. So one company that I'm aware of had somebody, so their office had lockers for all of their employees, and they had one individual that had trouble remembering their locker combination. It was related to a learning disability. And what somebody did was they took a marker and drew 3 different color lines. They used 3 different colors to indicate what numbers this person had to use to open their locker. 0 cost. Incredible creativity. It's things like that if you just think about it a little bit, it doesn't have to cost you anything. They didn't have to go out and spend money on some other type of lock combination that might have cost, a decent amount of money. They just made this accommodation and it worked, and it cost no money. So it's that kind of creative thinking that needs to go into that kind of process, and that's an example of something that I've seen.
I also want to mention the fact of having high expectations, not only for yourself, but for the people who hire you. Because one gentleman in particular who I've talked to Jill about over the years many, many times, and I want to see your reaction when I tell you this. He was in the system. He had been involved with BRS. He had been involved with the American Job Center in his region. But the most important factor for him was getting an education. Because once he got that degree, the places that he could apply for without being in the system was enormous. And guess where he's working now, Jill? He's in Rockefeller Center at Deloitte.
Oh, that's awesome.
Which is awesome. But what he needed, and I think it's a lesson for all of you in terms of accommodations, not only accommodations in the workforce, but for him it was an accommodation outside the workforce. He needed somebody to pick him up and dust him off and keep him on his feet and keep him trying, because it can be very debilitating when you get those rejections, particularly from the service system, because they may have lower expectations for you. And it's not the individual's fault, it's just difficult in the job market to really match people many times. And so people look at, well, everybody had to have an entry-level job, except that if you're 36, you kind of don't want to start at an entry-level job. You kind of expect to be a little bit higher up in any kind of company. But I guess 2 messages is don't give up around accommodations. He doesn't need any there because this company provides everything he needs. It's a perfect match. And so that's one of the other things is look at the environment in which you're applying and make sure it meets your needs.
If anyone can speak a little bit to also what companies, how they should be looking at accommodations and maybe even how you assist companies or HR related to accommodations, that would be helpful.
Yeah, so my current process at my organization is usually initiated by the employee who, for whatever reason, due to some disability, requests a reasonable accommodation to perform their job. And at that point, my role in that process is to help the interactive process and kind of facilitate that process between the manager and the employee to determine, okay, well, what is it about your current job that needs to be accommodated, and what resources do we have in the organization, or how can we think outside of the box, as John mentioned, to make that process or accommodate that, to make that, make the employee able to do their job to the best of their ability within, based on the resources at the organization. So a lot of times, for example, employees who have like severe or chronic migraines, and let's say you may have lights on the ceiling that are too bright in a certain working environment, we have removed light bulbs, or at the employee's request. Again, you don't want to isolate someone who has a disability as well, but they may request to have their desk moved to a different part of the department. Screen sizes, there are just so many different ways to accommodate. Working from home is often an accommodation as well for various different type of medical conditions. I will also highlight one resource that I often use as an HR business partner, which is the jan.org, the Job Accommodation Network. I mean, they have so much information, and sometimes there's never really a book or a page you can turn to, especially in HR, that says, hey, how am I going to handle this situation today, right? But the Job Accommodation Network, they have so many resources, and you can select the disability, whether it's cognitive, physical, and they give so many different recommendations that are creative, in my opinion, on how you can manage that interactive process where everyone comes out with a positive result. So
Answer their phone.
yes, and they actually answer their phone. Yes,
Just saying.
and you can get to a human being, which is sometimes rare in these days and times. So I just wanted to shout out that as a resource if that isn't already on the resource table.
Great.
And sometimes I will say it does require courage on the employee's behalf, because oftentimes, and I'll say this from the HR perspective, some of these concerns come up when there is a performance issue, right? So earlier it was mentioned about the employee who couldn't get to work on time and they were unable to navigate the public transportation system. It wasn't about their inability to do their work, right? It was about their inability to figure out how to do public transportation. And even I struggle sometimes trying to find my way around certain places. So that can happen to any and all of us. So I think it's just more so about having that communication, which I would say 9 times out of 10 is the issue or concern I see between an employee, the manager, and the company. And I think for the most part, at least for the companies that I've worked for, the organization as a whole has good intentions, right? It's a lot of times the communication process between that manager and that employee. I'm just trying to find and address what the needs are.
I think too, can I just address that transportation? It's always a good thing to advise our job seekers to do a trial run first. So we can work on that one. I think it's important. Today because I sidetracked.
Transportation.
Yeah, no, I wanted to make a point about the accommodation.
I'm sure you've had
A
that
lot of
before.
companies right now are going the universal design route, so everybody has a large screen monitor type thing. Some of the companies like Travelers, they actually do an ergonomic assessment, so they look at you, they look at your posture, they look at how you type, and then they'll set you up right at the get-go to avoid workers' injuries down the road. So a lot of it depends on the type of company that you're applying to. That will make a difference, you know, and I think that high-low cost is really important to understand that, you know, you might have a certain piece of equipment at home that works for you that is very costly, but there is another piece of equipment that is affordable that will do the same job. So I think, you know, being open to the employer's financial situation, if they are applying it, but it's not the high-end technology that you want, will that be acceptable for you? As long as it still helps you to do the essential functions of the job, that can fluctuate.
And I think that's a great point, and I think it's about, someone said this, looking at your environment and just walking into the place where you're looking for employment, seeking employment. Does this environment look like it is something, an environment that is going to acknowledge that there are differences? It doesn't have to be a disability. And what is it designed like? You know, we at Goodwin really pride ourselves in utilizing universal design for learning, while universal design for the environment is everywhere. You go to the bathroom and the toilet flushes for you, or you put your hand under the soap dispenser and the soap comes out. That's designed for everyone, so we don't have to spend money to accommodate oftentimes. And I think a lot of it has to do also with attitudes. You know, how people present information and how we are able to access it. So I think that's a key. Yeah. Thank you. Let's see. Something that is related to, obviously, we're talking about accommodations, we're talking about essential functions. How would an employer, how can we support employers in accessing the resources, or what are the things that employers can do to train their employees and their HR and their staff related to accommodating and achieving success?
So I would say the training piece is critical and the awareness as well. So in the organizations that I've worked at, and especially where I'm currently working, we've done a lot of D&I training, which includes different perspectives around ADA and how managers can navigate that and how employees can also navigate that. So I think it is definitely critical for the leadership in the organization, top down, to have their buy-in and support, not only because it's illegal not to, but more so because that attitude that you mentioned, if you have a leader who makes certain comments or exhibits a behavior that does not support what we're talking about around diversity and inclusion in this space, then that obviously would influence other leaders in the organization. So I think it's important to have that ongoing continuous training and not to just check the box to say, hey, we did it, but to really make that a part of your culture. And it should be a way of life and what that organization does, not just as, like I said, a check the box, but every day.
I think, too, the answer to so many of these questions are it depends. Depends on the organization. Many of the organizations do etiquette training, equal rights training throughout the year, and many don't know that they should be doing it. So if you are working with an individual who is maybe engaged with vocational rehabilitation, with Department of Developmental Services, oftentimes the job developer helping to place that individual will do training for the employer.
One of the things that, again, thinking out of the box, everybody's been saying things about the essential requirements of the position. Under the Federal Workforce Innovations and Opportunities Act, though, there's something called customized employment. And although customized employment is a term of art that basically means the kinds of strengths, interests, passions that Jonathan was talking about before are emphasized in developing a job that meets the employer's needs and the needs of the employee, there are other things that could be customized as part of a reasonable accommodation. For example, one of the services that we provided was with some people who just fell apart in an interview situation, totally fell apart. So the accommodation that we provided was when we contacted HR, we said, is it okay if somebody comes with them for the job interview? Is it okay if we give you a visual resume? Is it okay if we do some of these other things that make it easier for that person to get past that first hurdle and into a point where they are at least hired on a temporary basis so they can really show their stuff? And every time we've done that, people have been hired for the long term, although there are times when somebody has to come back in and kind of pick up pieces, like you go to a new timekeeping system, and the person doesn't learn the same way everybody else learns. So they have all the employees come into a room, they show them the new system, they all practice it, they all go back to their jobs and they're using the new system. This employee didn't learn it the same way and needs more practice and more rehearsal and more repetition. So that's having that as a reasonable accommodation also, and being able to say, I need more time. That may need to come from you unless you're working with an agency that is supporting you and can come back in and, like I said, if you run into a little glitch in your employment, be able to help you pick up the pieces and move on so that you're still employed.
We actually have someone from the audience who'd like to speak. Yes, and isn't that something that we have to do with every employee, is train them sometimes for the job in other areas and really reinforce, because everyone doesn't get it the same way. So I don't want to find you. The director of the Bureau of Rehab Services, right?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dave Dokas. I'm the director of BRS, which we've had referenced by the panel a couple of times. I just wanted to touch on, it was just mentioned, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act was a very important piece of legislation that's really untied the hands of the vocational rehabilitation program in terms of providing services to employers. Underneath this legislation, we can now offer direct services to employers who are considering hiring individuals with disabilities. So at present, we have some of our staff who are going out directly to employers and training them on accommodations, accessibility to the workplace, and other issues that might be impacting their potential to employ people with disabilities. So it's a very important thing to keep in mind is if we have an employer who's willing but apprehensive to go down the road of hiring an individual, certainly contact us and we can go out and try to assuage some of their fears they may be having and talk to them about things like low cost, low technology types of accommodations that are available. Jonathan's absolutely right. Many accommodations are no cost. As a program, we deal not only with assisting our individual clients in trying to obtain the accommodations they need to be employed with us, but we also are helping the clients of our agency in the workplace as well as the employers as a whole other customer to the voc rehab program in the endeavor of trying to hire individuals.
And how do people, I know people oftentimes access the Bureau of Rehab Services as they go through high school and they go through transition programs. How else are they accessing your programs?
We have many different referral sources to our program all around the state. Yes, high schools, colleges, universities are some of our major referral sources, but also all types of medical providers, different community rehabilitation providers, the workforce system partners. Department of Developmental Disabilities is a big referral source, Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. Really, many of our clients come to us through word of mouth. It was talked, Jill mentioned before that maybe 8 of 10 people that they interface with in the workforce system have never heard about vocational rehabilitation. Through the years, we've been regarded as one of the best kept secrets in town related to our potential as a program and how we can help individuals. So we will have clients come to us because their neighbor, their friend, or relative had received services from us before. We try to get our name out there. We try to market what we have available. But oftentimes people don't hear about us until they need us.
Great. It's true. Thank you very much. Yes. we have a few questions from the audience.
There's a question over here, too.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm going to give this back to you then. I'll ask. So we have several questions, actually. Advice for employers and individuals navigating, self-identifying, advocating when there is often trauma related to previous experiences relating to their disability. Any advice for those individuals? Sure. So advice for employers and the individuals who are trying to navigate when they're self-identifying and advocating. So oftentimes if they've experienced multiple times difficulty and trauma, or someone has said, well, we don't provide accommodations, or we don't do that, what is your advice? Where should they be accessing state resources? Should they be calling a lawyer? No, I don't mean that. But should they be, what documents should they be, that type of thing?
I think one of the things that I said before is, do you want to work for a place that's going to give you that much resistance and not want you because of your passion, your skill, etc. So sometimes walking away is the best option. Hiring a lawyer is another option, but what kind of footing do you then get with the people that are going to be your coworkers and managers and supervisors in the long term? I think some of the things is it might be helpful for somebody to, maybe there's a coworker that understands you and may be able to talk to your supervisor about some of the issues that you're facing. I think there are things that do come up after you've been employed, and having somebody who's an ally who can sit down and talk about these kinds of things with you and support, not to be the advocate who runs over everything everybody says and kind of puts the hard line in place, but somebody who can just kind of help explain when you're frozen because of your trauma, to be able to say, this is really difficult because of some past experiences. So is it okay if I contribute to this conversation? So I think it's okay to have somebody else with you and somebody else help you. And like I said, it could be a coworker, and in some cases it may be a friend. Again, companies that we've worked with are more than willing to have somebody come in, whether it's another professional in the field of employment services or what, are more than willing to do that when they value a diverse workforce.
I think also if there's trauma involved, first of all, I agree with Jonathan, don't be afraid to fail, we can learn from it. Okay, I've learned that this is not the right environment for me, but when it comes to trauma, we need to be more sensitive to that fact. I think maybe doing a little more research up front, read the mission statement of the employer, what kind of environment, culture are they creating? That might make a difference. And if you haven't heard of Glassdoor, you might want to visit Glassdoor, and there's actually remarks of employees, past and present, that talk about the management style and the culture and yada yada, and that might help. Maybe just doing a little bit more research. And then again, if you are receiving assistance from another agency, like BRS, for example, as Linda mentioned, there might be an opportunity to go in a paid internship or a working interview type situation where you can show the employer you have the skills and then they don't need to articulate it. That might help, but I think more research up front would be helpful.
And I think I think those are awesome tips to share, especially from a pre-employment perspective, and what the company's mission statement is, and what is their position, and what is also their example of support around individuals who have disabilities. I would also add that a lot of organizations have business resource groups or affinity groups. So for example, at my organization, we have a business resource group called ADAPT, and you don't have to have a disability to be a part of the group, but that group creates a safe space for employees who have disabilities or who want to support others who have disabilities to come together and talk about any issues, concerns, recognition, improvements that the company can do to make the space more accessible and more open to individuals who have disabilities. So I would also, if you don't have that in your organization, I would also recommend maybe getting one started in that respect.
And I think, Murph, you mentioned that you were not able to do your job the way it was previously, and so you made a decision to go back to school. And so looking at other options or opportunities or educational opportunities. I don't know if you wanted to speak to that at all.
One of the things that people with disabilities are also qualified for are the employment services through agencies. The agency that I'm interning right now is called Intercommunity. They're right here in East Hartford. And they have, the position I'm doing is called Integrated Care Coordination. So it's also something that we could do is, if you're going to a job interview, we can go with you as a case manager and help out that way. Being there as a support system and making sure that we also work with their families, their friends, making sure that they have support in the community to support them in whatever they're doing.
And, I'm sorry, did you have something? Okay. Kind of following up with that regarding communication with an employee with a disability, how does BRS or DRS address the individual? For example, related to job coach, family reinforcement, what are some of the roles of the people who can be those support systems?
That might be a question for Mr. Docus. I think he can speak to that better than anyone in the panel. So I welcome him to answer the question. I think it would be great.
And I can be a little more specific. Great.
Okay, so the question is about the role of the job coach or the supports that BRS can provide to the individual while they are in the workplace. So hiring job coaches, well, prior to bringing a job coach in, one of our vocational rehabilitation counselors will evaluate the needs of the individual. So understanding someone's disability is job one for us at BRS. Once we have somebody employed and looking at their specific needs, we take job coaching in basically two chunks. First is around deficit remediation. So we look at what the individual's specific needs for support are. We look at the recommendations of treating sources and other people, other community care providers who may have worked with them in the past in a more evaluative capacity to really understand what do they need in order to perform the essential functions of the job. Once we identify that, we employ a job coach from a community rehab provider to provide those specific interventions or services or supports. The second chunk has to do with skill building, which many times when an individual who begins an employment assignment, they'll need to learn differently than other employees would. So we would understand their learning styles and try to teach them the tasks of their job or support the supervisors or employer in helping them understand what they need to do to be successful. So really the voc rehab process itself is one of understanding disability, assisting someone to make appropriate career decisions and choices as to what might be the best avenues to go down in seeking employment, looking at their interests, their aptitudes, and their disability-related issues, to make those solid choices, to build a plan to say this is what's going to be required to be successful, and then providing the appropriate interventions to make sure they can obtain the employment and be successful in it. Another important point about BRS is that a good percentage of our client base are individuals who are already employed. And they come to us looking for services that will assist them in maintaining their current current employment. So, things like accommodations, things like saying I'm struggling on the job and I need something in order to be able to continue on with this job. And that could be a piece of technology, and it could be things like job coaching.
And one of the questions was also related to it. So there's people who are newly injured or have a job and then have an injury and then need the support services and handling that with their employer. And your organization can assist with that as well.
Absolutely. I speak from my own experience as a vocational rehabilitation counselor myself. At one point, I had clients who never worked at all prior to come seeing me, as far down the spectrum as people who were a little bit later in life who acquired a disability of any type and who may have been very successful in their career and now were faced with the decision as to whether or not they could continue to maintain that employment or did they need to use transferable skills to find an alternative. Oftentimes we can assist through the provision of technology, additional training, things like that to help people make career choices or changes, and others involved just trying to work with the employer to figure out how can we help keep this person on the job.
Thank you. That was a question actually also from the group. How do you handle a job or school while dealing with a new illness coming on? And I think accessing resources that are available in the community are helpful. Talking with a case manager, contacting the state, even talking if somebody has a new illness or a disability and they're receiving therapy services somewhere, occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy, social work. Speaking with those people to help you access those resources are really important. Another question, how does an employee with an invisible disability that has already self-identified to their supervisor respond to that manager when the manager says, I understand you have a disability, but that is a challenge for you, and we still have a business to run? Sounds like that was something someone said. But they're afraid to go to human resources because they don't want to, what? Complain, lose their job, which would be illegal, but okay. Anybody want to speak to that? How they might handle that?
So I think that's a great question and a common question. I think the fear of retaliation for someone who self-identifies with a disability is real. I would say that HR is not just there to hire and fire, right? So we're there to be a resource and a partner. And oftentimes, the person who is helping to mediate between a manager and an employee to do what's not only best for the company, but what's best for the employee. And I stand firm and true on that from an integrity and ethics perspective, although I know that every individual in HR or every organization may or may not always exemplify that. I would say that there is, I don't want to say a fine line, but I think that there is a need to define what the expectation is for the role that you're currently in, because your job expectations or to perform well is the same for everyone, right? So we all need to be able to perform in our jobs, whether we have a disability or not. I think the key is if you're still having issues with your manager around why you cannot be fully successful in that role or not able to perform at 100%, I think there's still a need for that interactive process to continue around what can be accommodated. Yes, there's an expectation to perform your job, right? But how can that organization or how can your manager work with you? And oftentimes, ignorance can definitely take precedence in a situation like that. And as an employee, and that's where HR will come in to help to navigate that. But as an employee, it does permit you to demonstrate some courage to be specific about how your manager can help you be better in your role. I'm not saying that that's an easy process, especially depending upon the manager, but it is something that I would recommend from the employee perspective. And if that's something that you're unsure about, definitely contact your HR partner or manager for the organization.
Yes.
If I may, I'd like to make one more point. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be speaking so much, but think of it from an employer's perspective. You have an individual who you've trained, you've hired, you've made an investment in to learn how to work within your company, and you require what could be a low medium cost type of accommodation. The expense associated from a dollars and cents perspective for an employer to accommodate you, a trained individual who's already working within the company, versus the cost of someone on whether or not they should approach HR to make that leap to disclose about a disability. From an employer's perspective, oftentimes they will welcome that. There's a lot of fear about that, and employers, yes, sometimes you'll have to Linda's point earlier, sometimes there's bad matches. There's environments where the superiors may not really be invested in trying to help someone with a disability, and largely that's driven because of lack of knowledge and fear. But many times, employers will say, I want this individual to stay. What can I do to help? It's really just about asking. But go ahead and pursue that. Disclose the disability, because you're going to find out one way or another where you're working, what the people who are supporting you are made of, and whether or not in the long run it's going to be the right environment.
Thank you.
May I just follow up on something that Dave said? One of the things that I think is important, that people who work for BRS, people who work at the AJCs, really want to do a good job. But they're limited by the funding that's available. So what I said when I introduced myself, which is network, 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 I think it's really important for each and every one of you to develop what we call social capital. It starts with your family, like Jonathan had the situation before. It extends to your neighbors, it extends to friends, it extends to your classmates. It actually, as Dave was just saying, well, the hidden message in that was have a relationship with your employer, have a relationship with your coworker, because it makes it easier than relying on an external system that may or may not have the funds to support you at the moment you need it. And I think that's unfortunately the reality, that as good as everybody's intentions are, it's not an entitlement to get some of those services that come outside your own network. But if you develop those relationships, you do have people to fall back on.
And I think part of that piece is self-determination and communication. And one of the things that we often see, I know I see it in my practice and with clients that I work with, and I see it when I work in the school systems, is we're not often honest with people about, and I don't mean someone who has a disability, I mean someone who is anyone. We aren't often honest about, well, you know, the way that you were interviewing or not, or talking or completing that job was just not what our expectation is. And so how can I help you? And I think asking that question, how can I help you? And being open to that. Because if someone doesn't know what they're doing wrong or poorly, then they can't fix it. And that is, you know, we try to be nice and socially appropriate, but in doing so, we often forget that if somebody doesn't know that they're struggling, then they can't fix it.
If I could just comment, one of the things that seems to also be an undertone this morning, and I believe that my colleague here alluded to it earlier, was the inherent culture that just exists within a company. For any company, and the fact that most companies, and I agree, are well-intentioned in the arena of hiring persons with disabilities, but it does oftentimes come down to education. And so what I encourage any company, large or small, to do is seek out the companies, the local companies in your area, whether it's in your local town or your city or across the state, that are leaders in this, and learn from them, because they're leaders in it because inherently it's in their culture.
Correct.
It exists there, for whatever reason that may be. And there's also organizations that exist where those companies come together and are collaborating with each other on how to improve the good work that they're already doing. And so I think that's a critical piece, because that will alleviate a lot of the fear and apprehension.
And the fight.
And the fight. If the companies that want to get better at this and be more well-intentioned and potentially become leaders themselves, if they seek out the companies that are getting the job.
And I think you spoke to it when, in your keynote, is then you're able to show your abilities and be able to do your job the way you want to, and not have to think about the disability piece of it. So I think. So, oh, did you have something?
Can I
Jill?
just?
And then we have some time for a few questions, and we will have some time at the end, I believe, also if people have some additional questions.
I just wanted to add to the two comments here. As Linda said, network, network, network. People not want ads are going to get you a job faster, and people will help you to keep that job. So that was a very valid point. Thank you for making it. Also something maybe when we're preparing our job seekers for an interview, we can suggest that they ask the employer, what are your expectations for this job? Because maybe the job description was not clear, so we can help them, up front. What are your expectations? What has worked for other employees? What hasn't worked? It's a good question to ask for this job. And ask for monthly meetings. My supervisor does a monthly check-in meeting with me, and then we do our quarterly meetings as well. Some companies do that on a regular basis and others don't. And interestingly enough, sadly, our bad points go into our employee files, the fact that we were late 3 days or the fact that we didn't complete our task on time, that's going in. But all the good things aren't going in. So toot your own horn. If you had a customer that thought that you provided exemplary customer service, then you tell your supervisor, so-and-so just complimented me. Or better yet, ask that customer to tell your supervisor to compliment you. Learn how to toot your own horn so the good things make it into the file as well. And if you do ask for that monthly meeting, that will be an opportunity to correct the fact when your supervisor says, well, you were late 3 times. Oh, let me explain. I had a flat tire, or, the bus was late, the bus is on a new schedule, whatever. You'll have an opportunity to explain it. However, I realize I should have called you, and I'll make note of that and fix that for the future. But that might help people to retain their jobs easier as well.
Any additional questions that people would like to ask the panel? Jan.
So I'm going at this from a totally different thought process because I'm an academia, and I oversee the nursing programs here at the university. And we struggle every day with getting clinical placements for our students. And it's weird, but the healthcare facilities are not so understanding of people with disabilities. Even if it's a temporary disability. Some of the facilities won't allow students in if they need medical marijuana. Even, they're not impaired, they're taking it for chronic pain or whatever. If you are in a orthopedic boot, they may not allow you to go. And because it's against their policy. So I'm just wondering, in the field of nursing, I think the state, UConn, I think graduated their first a student who is hemiplegic, and she is a practicing RN right now, and I'm, kudos to them for making that happen. I think we're trying here at Goodwin to be very open about, and what you said, John, resonated so strongly, recognizing what they can do, not be afraid of, and come up with all reasons of what's going to be an issue for them. Let them struggle and kind of figure it out. And the student at UConn certainly did that, but I just wonder if there's anything at the legislative level that is being done to work with healthcare facilities to be more accommodating to even very obvious physical disabilities.
So thank you for that question. I'm not aware of anything going on at the state level to address that, and it's probably because they don't know about it.
And I think it might be another opportunity for us to sit in this room with healthcare providers and have
I agree.
I do want to say, though, that some of the other schools of medicine, for example, like UConn and Quinnipiac and Yale, as well as nursing I just did a presentation for nursing students at QU down in where they're doing their field internship. And I think having that kind of pre-service training is something that has been coming from the higher ups for that exact reason that you're bringing up. So I think things are slowly changing because we're getting to the students and we're getting to some of the faculty who are aware of the scenario you just described. And ultimately that will trickle up to the administration in those healthcare facilities and in other disciplines as well. So the good news is we've arrived and now we're part of the curriculum.
One more question, and then we will have some time at the end also. If you'd like to ask now, or we can hold it till afterwards, it's totally up to you. Did you have a question? In the back? No? Oh, I thought you raised your hand. That's okay. Okay, so we're going, we thank you very much for all of the great information and your resources. And I think it's great for everyone to know who is out there in the community and who we can reach out to if we do have questions or we want further information. So we're going to take a short break, about 10 minutes, and then we're going to come back and we will be learning a little bit more about Project Search, and then we also have some case studies. Thank you.
Yeah.